As we have configured our cluster with phase scheduler and also understand how the jobs will behave by running several jobs, now let us review some of the important properties related to phase scheduler. There are properties as part of yarn-side.xml which can be used to override the behavior of phase scheduler. You can go to Cloudera Manager and then click on yarn, then go to configuration. We can search for scheduler to actually get the properties related to scheduler. However, this will not only give properties related to scheduler in general, but also there can be properties related to the type of scheduler. You can see here these properties are related to capacity scheduler, and there are all the properties which are related to different types of scheduler which can be used while configuring the cluster. To get all the properties related to phase scheduler, you can just search for phase here and you can see the details. The first one is yarn resource manager scheduler class, which we have used to configure between FIFO and phase scheduler for past few topics. And then the allocation file, we'll come back to this in a moment. And then there are certain properties as part of yarn-side.xml itself which control the behavior of the phase scheduler. So you see there is a property called as yarn.scheduler.phase.user as default queue. If you recollect, when we actually submitted the jobs earlier without specifying the queue, by running these commands, it automatically went into the queue named after the user, such as root.users.itversity, and that is because of this property. You can also go to the resource manager UI and you can see a queue with the username which we are using to submit the jobs. When we actually submitted the jobs as user HDFS, there was another queue called as root.users.hdfs. Also, there is a couple of additional properties related to very important concept called preemption. If you recollect, when we submit the jobs as part of root.prod and root.qa, first the resources are all allocated to the job which we have submitted to root.prod because it requires much higher capacity than what we have in the cluster as per resources, and it took up all the resources and it started running the job. When we submitted the next job in root.qa, even though it got resources only after the resources are freed up because some of the containers which were running are moved to complete state. Until then, it did not get any resources. However, in real world scenario, when we actually submit the jobs in production, and if the resources are taken up by other queues, then the production jobs has to wait until some of the containers related to the jobs in other queues move to the complete state, which might not be acceptable for production jobs. In those scenarios, we can actually enable phase scheduler preemption. So whenever the resources are being used by other queues, when we submit the new jobs in some other queue, if it has to get the resources, if we want them to get the resources immediately, then we have to first enable this. We can also set the threshold at which the preemption should occur, because when we enable the preemption to get the resources, some of the running containers will be killed. And we don't want to kill unnecessarily. For that reason, we can actually set the thresholds. Like this, there are several other properties which you can go through. Don't worry too much about this phase scheduler allocations deployed. It is just a informational thing as part of a UI. Whatever you have specified as part of this allocation file in the form of XML is being converted to JSON and it is displayed here. That being said, now if you actually get into this phase scheduler allocation file, which is named as phase scheduler.xml typically, there are several properties in this also. And these are all based on the tag names. So we have allocations at the higher level tag. Within allocations, we can have multiple tags such as queue placement policy, so on and so forth. You can actually get the details with respect to all the properties by clicking on this URL. It is official Cloudera documentation with respect to phase scheduler configuration. If you scroll down, it gives the explanation of all the properties that are part of answer.xml. Then it actually gives the details with respect to phase scheduler.xml. There are properties such as queue placement policy, user max apps default, queue max apps default, queue max aim share default. This is related to application master. Default phase share preemption threshold, default phase share preemption timeout, default min share preemption timeout, so on and so forth. And then queue, which is the main one. Again, queue have several other properties such as wait, scheduling policy, ACLs related things to control the permissions, min resources, max aim share, max running apps, phase share preemption threshold, phase share preemption timeout, min share preemption timeout. These are the properties that can be defined as part of phase scheduler.xml file. We have already updated this queue tag with several properties. You can see here scheduling policy is fair for this root queue, and then we have nested queues within this root such as default, users, prod, QA, and detail. Again, within these nested queues, again we have given scheduling policy as fair, and also we have given weights. And then if you scroll down, we also have queue placement policy. So this queue placement policy actually facilitates us to define the rule such as submit in a particular queue if it is submitted to the default queue based on the username. So that is actually defined as part of the queue placement policy. So like this, you can control the behavior. When it comes to scheduling policy, the values can be either fair or FIFO or DRF. DRF stands for dominant resource fairness. Typically, fair scheduler only allocate the resources based on the memory as the criteria. However, if you want to consider other resource types as also the criteria, then we have to use DRF. It can use resources such as CPU as well on top of memory to determine the fairness while submitting the jobs into the queues using phase scheduler. So this is about some of the important properties which can be useful while configuring or customizing the behavior of the phase scheduler on our cluster.